So when we think about explorers, we often think of women and men who've travelled to the ends of the earth, perhaps in search of new knowledge or new ground. I would like to tell you that exploring isn't actually that hard. You might be thinking of someone in beige shorts and a khaki shirt sailing down a caiman-infested river in a longboat. Or you might be imagining someone dressed up in furs, their face barely visible through the frost, and battling a strong Arctic wind. It's really, really not that hard, though. It's actually quite easy. There's just 6 simple steps, and I'd like to tell you what they are. Becoming an explorer was the best decision of my life, and I believe that absolutely everyone should try it at least once. So let's start with step 1. Find something that you're really, really interested in. We all have different interests and different opinions on what's interesting, but we can all find something that we're interested in. Maybe that's something that's close to your heart, like improving the quality of life of a loved one. Or maybe it's a cause like feminism, or maybe something like local unemployment. Whatever it is, you just have to find it and pursue it. And if you're an amazing cook or a photographer or a mathematician, you're just born to love animals, there's got to be something. My own personal interest has always been in science, and that's why my journey started here at the University of Glasgow, where I studied genetics as an undergraduate. I've always been a problem solver and quite curious and inquisitive about the world, and that's why, after a few years of post-degree employment, I decided to go to a forgotten corner of South America, as it's often called. So let's move on to step 2. That's break out of your comfort zone. So your comfort zone is that part in the middle, which is where most of us live most of the time. But if you step out of that into another space, but before you get to your danger zone, which is where you might feel just a bit scared or a bit unhappy or uncomfortable, then you end up in a place where amazing things can happen. My experience of stepping out of my comfort zone was something like that classic explorer of donning beige, or in my case, purple with jeans, and walking into a forest to discover new things and find interesting new discoveries. So let's start with Paraguay. South America is known for its deep jungles on one side and its ice-capped mountains on the other. And somewhere in the middle, between Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil, is Paraguay. It's home to a huge range of biodiversity and biodiverse habitats, including the Atlantic forest, the Cerrado, and the Gran Chaco. It's actually a biologist's dream. I went there with the intention of studying monkeys in the Atlantic forest, despite the fact that I'd never studied monkeys before, and I think I didn't even know what the Atlantic forest was at that point. But it didn't matter, and I didn't need my degree to tell me that I was having a really amazing experience and that I'd stepped right out of my comfort zone. So now moving on to step 3. Once you've got that interest, and once you've stepped out of that comfort zone, sort of having that snowball into a passion is actually easier than you would think. And the explorers of old must have been really passionate about what they did in order to achieve their aims. If we think about it, Dr. David Livingstone risked life and limb in order to search for the source of the River Nile, which unfortunately he never found, but he really made a good job of it. My own passion is for conservation in Paraguay. Let me tell you why. The volunteer experience that I had was absolutely fantastic. I was living in a forest paradise. There was tumbling streams, there was melodies of frogs and insects and birds. For the first time, I got to see the sunset over an uninterrupted tree line. And every night it got so dark that I could see every single star in the sky and the Milky Way, which just stretches on forever. Unfortunately, where I was a forest fragment that was one of the last ones left in the country. And as soon as I stepped out of there, instead of that uninterrupted tree line, it was replaced by cattle ranches and soy fields, which made me feel really sad. Instead of the sounds of the birds tweeting in the trees and the mammals foraging in the undergrowth, it was the sounds of chainsaws and trucks dragging trees to the chopper. It's really awful. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Paraguay, the cattle ranching and the soy farming are the 2 industries that are driving its economy to be the fastest growing economy on the entire continent. So you can see that this is a complex problem that we're facing. At that time, I hadn't even realised the scope of the problem, nor did I really know anything about conservation. Conservation in Paraguay has frequently been left out of the conservation movement, and that's still having devastating effects on its habitats and wildlife, even as I stand here speaking to you today. But at that time, I can say that it seemed like a challenge that was so fantastic that I'd never felt so determined or excited about anything else in my life. So moving on to the next step, step 4, is get active and drive change. I said at the start that being an explorer was easy, and it really is. Once you've found your interest and stepped out of your comfort zone, that's you've found the thing that really pushes you forward and you've started exploring new boundaries and pushing yourself to your limits, and you've got passionate about it, you're really standing in a really good place to do something amazing. In 2010, I decided to leave my home in Scotland and move permanently to Paraguay, and I set up an organisation called Para La Tierra. Para La Tierra is a not-for-profit organisation focused on the protection of fragile habitats in Paraguay through scientific research, community engagement, and environmental education. When I tell people that's what I did, they often say things like, "Whoa, that must have been really hard," or "How do you manage so many projects at once?" or "How did you deal with starting from scratch somewhere new?" And the answer is, by always doing the thing that I was interested in. So it was always actually really easy. Even starting the organisation, despite the amount of problems that we have, is a really good memory. The first volunteers that came had such a bad time that they left halfway through their stay. We really weren't doing a good job. But we just took it as a learning experience, and the next volunteers that came along extended their stay by 2 months, and we now run a really successful volunteer organisation. When I first went to Paraguay, I met a language barrier. I didn't speak Spanish or Guarani, which is the local indigenous language, but every time I went to try and speak to someone, they met me with such warmth and kindness that they made it so easy for me to learn, so it wasn't even a problem. And this other problem is that for at least the first year and a half, my car broke down every single day because no one had ever taught me how to take care of a 1998 4x4 truck. But despite all those problems and all the problems that came after it, it didn't matter because all they were doing was bringing me closer to the thing that I was passionate about, and that's conservation in Paraguay. Plus, it has its benefits. I get to live on a beautiful reserve called Laguna Blanca, which in English means White Lagoon. It's so called for its crystal clear waters and its white sands, and it's surrounded by 800 hectares of habitat of Atlantic forest and cerrado, both which are globally endangered and biodiversity hotspots. So you can imagine the amount of exotic wildlife that I get to see. Every day is summer, apart from about a month in July when we have to wear jumpers and sometimes put on socks. I get to walk in the forest, I get to swim in the lake, and I get to take siestas. But it's not all easy. Obviously, living on a remote field site in Paraguay has its downs. Like, for example, we have more power cuts than you do, and sometimes it's too hot to do anything except from lie down, but you might also see that as a positive. So now moving on to step 5. That's establish yourself a goal and find other people to help you. Establishing a goal is really key to being an explorer, and all the old explorers had goals. Whether it was the peaks of mountains, the sources of rivers, or even the tips of the planet, they all had something that they were aiming to achieve. They all also had their teams behind them. For example, Neil had Buzz and the entire NASA group behind him when he stepped on the moon, and Christopher Columbus set sail from the coast of Spain with 3 ships in his wake. The goal that I decided to set for myself was to create a model of a conservation organisation, and one that could be replicated in other parts of the world. And I'm now lucky enough to say that I've found a team of 5 people who are just as passionate as I am about that goal, who are willing to help me. As a team, we believe that conservation, to be successful, has to engage other people in conservation activities. And so we really want for everyone to be a global team in terms of conservation. Just imagine what we could achieve if everyone was as passionate about conservation. So moving on to step 6 is repeat steps 1 to 5 ad nauseum. Just because you've taken your first action and completed your first goal doesn't mean you have to stop. And J.R.R. Tolkien and Elon Musk didn't stop after the success of their first projects. They kept on going. So you found your interest, you stepped out of your comfort zone, turned it into a passion, taken action, and you're now working with your favourite teammates. The sky's the limit as long as you have that passion. I mentioned before that Paraguay was a host of brilliant wildlife. And one of the things that I get to do every day is say that I'm still an explorer. Just to give you a few examples of some of the things that we've discovered, this is the naked-tailed armadillo. You can see it's about the size of a domestic cat, but until we'd got to Paraguay and we're standing in Laguna Blanca, no one had ever recorded it in the country. This moth is called Catharissa serena. She's about the size of your palm, but she was also thought to be extinct for the last 85 years. One morning we woke up and she was sat there on our car windscreen. We've now managed to monitor them twice a year, and we've even managed to grow caterpillars of the species. This last one is by far the most exciting. This is a spiny lizard, and his name is Tropidurus lagunablanca. He was only named last month because he's brand new to science. That's never before recorded on the Earth. And you might recognize his name, Laguna Blanca, because that's where we live. And he's been given that name because he's endemic to that place. That means he's only found around about our research station. But unfortunately, it means that if that's ever destroyed, then all the members of his species and population will be destroyed with it. There are lots of challenges that you come up against, but as long as you're always trying something new, following your passion and pushing your boundaries, it should always be rewarding. For example, one of the main challenges that we're facing at this time is that I still haven't found a way to secure the long-term protection of Laguna Blanca. But my team and I are absolutely determined that we're going to find a way to do it, and we're not going to give up. One of the things that we've just done is to invest more in environmental education. And to do that, we signed a partnership with another female explorer, Maritza Morales from Mexico. Our idea is to have a conservation organization where children learn environmental education in order to teach children. That means that they're learning skills and independence and growing their own passions in the hope that one day they'll be able to drive change in their own communities. And that's something that we're trying to replicate in Paraguay as well. We're really excited about it. The Oxford Dictionary defines being an explorer as someone who explores a new or unfamiliar area. I think we need to stop defining an area as somewhere where you can stand and put a flag, and instead think about it more like a field of study like astronomy or biology, or maybe a piece of technology like a robot or an app, or something more creative like a poem or a play. Just think, the next time you read about someone doing something amazing, just by following these 6 steps, it could be you. And maybe it could take you to an unknown place in South America, or maybe it'll take you around the corner to your local community centre, or maybe somewhere completely different but just as exciting. I think there are too many problems in the world for one or even thousands of people to solve them all. So we all need to discover how to be our own explorers and how we can contribute. Thank you for listening.